If your child committed a crime, should you be arrested too? Think about that for a second. Your child, your own flesh and blood, does something terrible. Something unthinkable. A crime that shatters lives. But instead of just investigating them, the police come for you too. They knock on your door, place you in handcuffs, and read you your rights. In their eyes, you are just as guilty. Sounds extreme, right? But that's exactly what happened to Jennifer and James Crumbley, the first parents in U.S. history to be held criminally responsible for their child's school attack. Their teenage son opened fire at school, taking innocent lives. A tragedy that sent shockwaves across the country. But here's where things take a turn. This wasn't just about him. His parents were charged with involuntary manslaughter, accused of ignoring the warning signs, and failing to stop him. This has never happened before. Parents have been sued. Parents have been blamed. But arrested? Prosecuted like criminals? Some say this is justice. That parents who ignore red flags should pay the price. Others say this is a dangerous precedent, a government overreach that could change parenting forever. If this case sets a legal precedent, where does it end? If your child bullies another kid to the point of tragedy, should you be arrested? If your teen gets behind the wheel and crashes, should you be the one sitting in court? Or, does this case make sense? Do parents who fail to act deserve punishment just as much as their children? After all, if your child was showing signs of danger, and you ignored it, shouldn't you be held accountable? This case has divided the country. And it raises a much bigger question: how much responsibility should parents really have for their kids' actions? Before you answer, let's go deeper. Because by the end of this video, you might never look at parental responsibility the same way again. Imagine this. Your child is drawing images of violence. Writing notes that scream for help. Their teachers are so alarmed that they call you into school, urging you to do something. They see the warning signs. They know something is wrong. And now, they're handing the responsibility over to you. What would you do? This was not just a troubled teenager. This was not a minor concern. The red flags were right there, screaming for attention. But Jennifer and James Crumbley didn't listen. Some parents miss the warning signs. Some don't recognize them. But what if you see them and still do nothing? That's what makes this case so disturbing. On the morning of the attack, teachers found something chilling. A drawing from the Crumbley's son. A gun. A bullet. A wounded figure. Words scribbled next to it, the thoughts won't stop. Help me. This wasn't just a sign of distress, it was a warning. The school took immediate action. They called his parents. They told them their son needed help. They recommended urgent counseling. They asked them to take him home. And what did Jennifer and James Crumbley do? Nothing. They refused to take him home. They left him at school. No counseling. No immediate intervention. No follow-up. And just hours later, he opened fire. But here's the most shocking part. Just days before this tragedy, Jennifer and James Crumbley did something that turned this from a story of neglect to a story of criminal responsibility. They bought their son a gun. Not a toy. Not a BB gun. A real, lethal firearm. A Christmas gift for a teenager who was already showing signs of deep psychological distress. Did they think he was stable enough to own this? Did they believe he was responsible? Or did they not care? This raises a terrifying question. Is this an extreme case, or is this just what bad parenting looks like at its absolute worst? Think about the bigger picture. We hear stories all the time about parents who ignore their children's struggles. Kids who show disturbing behavior, but no one steps in until it's too late. How many times have we heard, "I never saw the signs after a tragedy"? But here, the signs were there. And the Crumbleys ignored them. Not just once. Not just twice. But over and over again until the worst happened. So, what do you think? Are these parents criminally responsible? Or is this just a tragic case of reckless, irresponsible parenting? Why were Jennifer and James Crumbley arrested, but so many other parents in similar situations walked free? If ignoring red flags makes you legally responsible, shouldn't we have seen more cases like this before? Let's take a step back and look at other cases. Similar warning signs. Similar parental negligence. But no handcuffs. No prosecution. No trial. Why? Meet Michael, a 17-year-old who carried out a devastating attack at his school in Washington. Before the incident, he showed alarming behavior. He made disturbing comments. He sketched violent scenes. He had a history of aggression. And most chillingly, his own parents were warned by school officials that he needed urgent help. Teachers saw the signs. Friends reported his behavior. Even law enforcement had flagged him as a risk. But his parents? They brushed it off. Said he was just being a teenager. Days before the attack, he was caught searching for weapons online. His parents were notified. Did they take action? No. Did they remove his access to potential danger? No. And just like the Crumbleys, they had one final chance to stop the worst from happening. But they didn't. But here's the twist: after the attack, they weren't arrested. They weren't charged. They walked away free. The argument? They didn't pull the trigger. They didn't know he was serious. But isn't that exactly what the Crumbleys said? So, why the difference? Why were the Crumbleys charged, but these parents weren't? Now, let's look at another case. A 16-year-old in Texas, who posted violent threats online. His words weren't vague. They weren't jokes. They were detailed, targeted threats. Someone reported him. Authorities got involved. And guess what? His parents were warned. They were told, "Your son is dangerous. He's making threats. He needs help." And what did they do? Nothing. No therapy. No monitoring. No consequences. Days later, the unthinkable happened. He carried out the attack. But when the police started investigating, no charges were brought against his parents. Again, the argument was simple: they weren't responsible for what he did. But wait, how is this different from the Crumbleys? This is where things get complicated. Are we really seeing equal justice, or are we witnessing a case of selective prosecution? Let's break this down. The Crumbleys were charged because they bought the weapon. Because they ignored warnings. Because they did nothing when their son showed signs of trouble. But didn't these other parents do the same? Didn't they also ignore clear signs? Didn't they also have warnings from teachers, from police, from friends? Didn't they also have the chance to step in and prevent a tragedy? So why them? Why this case? Is it because the media focused on it? Because the prosecutors wanted to make an example out of them? Because of public outrage? Or, was this a turning point in American law? A case that sent a message: parents are no longer off the hook. That ignoring warning signs won't just be morally wrong, it'll be criminally wrong. This is where you come in. What do you think? Is this justice finally being served? Or is this a dangerous legal precedent that could lead to parents being held responsible for crimes they had no direct part in? Because if the law is going to hold parents accountable now, where does it stop? And more importantly, where should it stop? We've talked about neglectful parents. The ones who ignored red flags. The ones who should have seen disaster coming. But what about parents who did everything right, and still ended up raising a child capable of unthinkable acts? What if this isn't just about bad parenting? What if some kids are wired differently? And no matter how much love, guidance, or discipline they receive, they still take a dark path? This raises a terrifying question: can any child turn into a criminal? And if so, could it happen to your child? Meet the Jones family. A middle-class household. Loving parents. A stable home. They raised their son, Mark, with values, discipline, and encouragement. There were no red flags. No warnings. No signs of trouble. But when Mark turned 18, something changed. He became withdrawn. Secretive. And then, shockingly, he committed a violent crime that no one saw coming. His parents were devastated. They asked the same question over and over: what did we do wrong? But the truth is, they didn't do anything wrong. They had followed every parenting rule. They had given him opportunities, love, support. And yet, he still made the choice to destroy lives. So, was it bad parenting? Or was there something deeper going on? Then there's Lisa. A straight-A student. Bright future. Loving parents. No history of violence. Until one day, she did the unthinkable. Her parents were stunned. They had been involved in her life. They had set boundaries. They had shown her nothing but care. But despite all that, she made choices that landed her behind bars. Was it something her parents failed to teach her? Or was she always going to end up this way, no matter how good they were? This is where science steps in. Experts have debated for years: is criminal behavior something you're born with, or something you learn? Studies show that certain brain structures, like the amygdala, which controls fear and aggression, can be different in people who commit violent crimes. Some researchers believe that genetics play a role. That some people are predisposed to violence. That no matter how they're raised, their brain is wired for destruction. But others argue the opposite. They say that environment, parenting, education, community, shapes a child's future more than anything else. So which is it? Is a criminal born, or made? And if science proves that some kids are wired differently, should their parents still be blamed for their actions? Here's what makes this debate even scarier. If there are kids who will commit crimes no matter how they're raised, then how can parents ever be sure they're doing enough? Could a loving, responsible parent still end up in the same nightmare as the Crumbleys? Could they be blamed for something they truly had no control over? And if we start punishing parents for their children's actions, where does it end? Should every parent of a troubled child live in fear of being arrested? Or should we accept that sometimes, no matter how good the parenting, some kids will choose their own path, one that no one could have predicted? We all like to believe that good parenting creates good children, and bad parenting creates bad ones. But what if that's only part of the truth? What if, despite a parent's best efforts, their child still turns violent? And what if some parents raise their kids in the worst possible way, but those kids never commit a single crime? That brings us to the ultimate question: how much control do parents really have over their child's destiny? And if parents only influence part of a child's future, should we still hold them responsible when that child commits a crime? Some scientists argue that certain children are predisposed to aggressive or violent behavior from birth. Research into criminal psychology suggests that the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for processing fear and emotions, can be underdeveloped in people with psychopathic tendencies. In some cases, individuals with lower activity in the prefrontal cortex struggle with impulse control and decision-making, which increases the likelihood of risky or dangerous behavior. Then, there's the MAOA gene, also known as the warrior gene. Some studies suggest that people with a specific version of this gene may have a stronger tendency toward aggressive behavior, especially if they experience childhood trauma or abuse. But here's where things get complicated: not everyone with these traits turns violent. Some grow up in loving homes and never commit a crime. Others, raised in harsh environments, become law-abiding adults. So if biology plays a role, but not a decisive one, can we really say that parenting alone determines a child's future? We've all heard the phrase, "it starts at home." And in many ways, that's true. Studies show that children raised in unstable or neglectful homes are more likely to engage in criminal activity. But let's flip the script. What about the parents who do everything right, the ones who provide love, structure, and discipline? Yet their child still chooses a path of destruction? If a child raised in a bad home commits a crime, we blame the parents. But if a child raised in a good home does the same thing, who do we blame then? This raises an uncomfortable question: is parenting truly the biggest factor in shaping a child's behavior? Or are we oversimplifying a far more complex reality? Let's look at two real cases. In one, a mother saw the warning signs early. Her son had frequent violent outbursts, struggled with impulse control, and showed disturbing behavior. She took immediate action, sought therapy, enrolled him in behavioral programs, and worked closely with teachers. And it worked. Her child turned his life around and never committed a crime. Now, consider another case. The same warning signs. The same early interventions. The same dedicated parents who did everything they could. But in the end, none of it made a difference. This brings us to a disturbing truth: two sets of parents, two identical approaches, yet two completely different outcomes. So if parenting isn't the only determining factor, should parents be punished when things go wrong? The Crumbley case made history because it challenged the legal system in an unprecedented way. But if this becomes the new standard, what kind of precedent does it set? Let's say a child is caught stealing. Should their parents be arrested? What if a teenager vandalizes a building? Should their mother or father be charged with destruction of property? And here's an even more controversial question: if we hold parents responsible for their child's crimes, should we also reward them for their child's successes? If a child wins a national competition, should their parents get a trophy too? If we blame parents when things go wrong, shouldn't we also credit them when things go right? The legal system doesn't work that way. Parents don't get medals when their children succeed. So why should they be punished when their children fail? In the end, this debate isn't just about one family, it's about how we define justice. Are we punishing the right people? Or are we just looking for someone to blame? Should we be holding parents accountable for the crimes of their children, or is this a dangerous path that could change the justice system forever? This case has changed everything. For the first time in American history, parents are being held criminally responsible for their child's crime. But is this a step toward justice, or a dangerous new precedent? Think about it, where do we draw the line? Some argue that parents should always be held accountable for their child's actions. Others say that some kids are simply wired a certain way, and no amount of good parenting can stop them. So which side is right? Let's look at the argument for punishing parents. Some believe that parents are the first line of defense when it comes to preventing crime. If a child turns violent, they say, it must mean the parents failed at their job. Their reasoning? A parent is responsible for feeding their child, clothing them, educating them, so why shouldn't they be responsible for their moral development too? Supporters of this idea argue that parents who ignore warning signs, refuse to discipline their children, or even enable bad behavior should face the consequences. But here's the million-dollar question. If we start holding parents legally responsible for crimes their children commit, where does it stop? If a teenager steals from a store, should the parents be fined? If a child bullies another online, should the parents be sued? What if a kid vandalizes public property, should the parents go to jail? And if a child gets into a fight at school, does that mean their parents are violent people too? At what point do we stop punishing the child, and start punishing the parents? Now let's flip the argument. There are countless stories of parents who did everything right, taught their children good morals, provided a stable home, and tried to guide them down the right path, but it didn't matter. Some kids rebel. Some kids hide their dark thoughts from their families. Some kids simply choose a different path. Research shows that not all criminal behavior is learned at home. In fact, many violent offenders had normal, loving upbringings. Their crimes weren't the result of bad parenting, but something much deeper. If that's the case, then why should the parents take the fall? Is it really fair to punish a mother and father for something their child did when they had no control over it? Imagine this, your child, the one you raised, commits a crime. You're devastated. You feel like you failed. But now, on top of that, you're being thrown in jail too. Does that sound like justice? Or does that sound like a society desperate to blame someone, anyone, for what went wrong? The Crumbley case is historic. And what happens next could shape the legal system for years to come. Because if we start holding parents responsible for their children's actions, how far will the justice system go? Will we see more cases where parents are arrested for crimes they didn't commit? Will schools start reporting parents if their kids misbehave? Will the government start investigating families before a crime even happens? And here's the most chilling question of all. Could you be next? We've presented both sides. Now it's your turn to decide. Should parents always be held accountable for their child's crimes? Or is this an unfair punishment that ignores the bigger picture? Let us know in the comments below. Your opinion could change someone's mind. And if you want more deep, thought-provoking discussions like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We're just getting started. Now, let's make this personal. Imagine this, you wake up to a phone call. Your child has just been arrested for a terrible crime. You're shocked, confused, maybe even heartbroken. But before you can even process what's happening, the police are knocking on your door too. They tell you that you are under arrest. That your child's actions are your responsibility. How would you react? Would you accept the blame? Or would you fight back, arguing that your child made their own choices? Let's go even further. If your child broke the law today, should you be punished tomorrow? Right now, courts are trying to answer this exact question. And it's dividing the nation. Some people believe that parents should always be held accountable. That if a child commits a crime, it must be because the parents failed somewhere along the way. Others argue that this is dangerous. That punishing parents for their child's actions is a slippery slope, one that could lead to innocent people losing their freedom. So, where should we draw the line? If a child bullies someone at school, should the parents be fined? If a teen vandalizes a building, should the parents go to jail? And if a child commits a violent crime, should the parents face the same punishment? This isn't just a legal question. It's a moral one. And the answer affects everyone. Now, we turn the debate over to you. If your child committed a crime, would you expect to be arrested? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do parents deserve jail time for their kids' actions? Or is this a dangerous road that could lead to injustice? We'll be reading your comments and featuring some of the best ones in a future video. If you found this video thought-provoking, make sure to hit that like button so more people can join the debate. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We cover the most shocking, controversial, and eye-opening cases, and you won't want to miss what we have coming next.